What I want to talk to you today is about the one of my favorite cameras, which is the Widelux F7 camera. It's a panoramic camera that uses what's called a rotating lens or a swing lens motion on the camera itself. And when you look at the back of the camera, you'll know why that is. So the back of the camera actually has a curved film plane. So as the lens rotates, it's actually making a longer exposure on the film plane itself, which is curved in the back. When you look at the camera, it has very, very minimal and simple features. There's only 3 shutter speeds on the camera, which are 1/115th of a second, 1/125th of a second, and 1/250th of a second. The apertures go anywhere from f2.8 to f11, and that's just changed by just turning this dial, which will change the lens aperture on the front of the camera. To advance the film, you just wind this knob, and when you wind the knob, you can see that the lens turns in the turret, and it's getting ready for its next exposure. There's your frame counter and your shutter release. There's a really, really nice viewfinder right here. So when you look through the viewfinder, you put the camera up to your eye, you have a nice wide angle view, which gives you a 140-degree angle view. There's on the turret itself, there are actually a couple of arrows that point out so you know what the angle is that you're looking at. I think that's pretty handy when I'm doing street photography with this camera, because a lot of times I don't want to put the camera up to my eye. I'll have the camera around my waist or around on the strap around my neck, and as I'm pointing the camera at the subject, I'd want to be able to see what the angle of view is, and these arrows really help out with that. So when you take the picture, as I showed before, the lens turrets back to the starting position, and if I change the shutter speed to a faster shutter speed, let's go to 1/125th of a second, you'll see that the lens moves considerably faster. So that's the basics of the Widelux F7 camera. It's one of my favorite cameras. It's something that I use all the time, and if you don't have one, I'd highly recommend consider getting one for the future, because it's a tremendous camera. Alright, so what I want to show you today is I want to show you how to load the Widelux F7 with some film, because the first time I did it, it was a little bit of a challenge, just because there were a couple of things that I wasn't really aware of. I didn't have the manual, so I just wanted to make sure that people out there have how I do it. That's probably the easiest way of putting it. So the couple of different things that you need to be aware of is there's a column here, there's the curved part of the lens chamber here, and then there's another column over here. But the interesting thing about this column is that there's an opening in this column that sometimes, the very first time I loaded it, the film came through that opening and the right side of my negatives weren't sharp. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of that, so it doesn't happen to you in the future. You need to make sure that it goes underneath this column over here. So to load a roll of film, what I have is I have a roll of Ilford Pan 50. That's one of my favorite films. I'm a big fan of Ilford film. I'm a big fan of Fuji too, but unfortunately I have Ilford film right here. So you just pull up your rewind knob, lift that up. When I had my camera repaired, one of the things that they did is they put on a new rewind knob, which actually makes it a lot easier for me to rewind the film, and that's an option that you may be able to get if you're going to have your camera serviced. I always kind of crimp the end of the film a little bit because it makes it easier to go underneath the columns. But all I do is I just take my roll of film, bring it underneath this column, up and over, and you can see that now it's going to be going over the shutter, the curved part of the shutter. And here I want to make sure that it goes underneath the column. So it's going underneath the column here. And I just kind of push it a little bit to make sure that it goes through. I want to wind the camera. What happens is that brings the leader up. As you can see over here, the leader's coming up. I just grab that, pull it out a little bit, and then I want to feed it into the take-up spool, which is just right here. And once I get it into the take-up spool, just make sure that it's, see, there you go. Make sure that it's in there tightly. wind. So now that my film is underneath the column, it's around the shutter, it's on my take-up spool. So now I take the back, put the back on my camera, lock it, and before I even wind it to my first frame, I always take my take-up spool and take up the slack of my film, because one thing that I've always wanted to, whenever I've owned 35mm cameras, whenever I advance my film, one of the things that I always want to look for is I want to make sure that my film is moving. So when I see the rewind knob moving as I'm transporting my film, I know that the film is moving and it's not going to come undone and I'm going to get a blank roll of film. So that's really simply how I load my Widelux F7 camera. It's a great camera. I have really good images out of this, and I just love it to death.